All right. So, starting off the show with Rhiannon Giddens, who's a MacArthur Fellow, marvelous singer-songwriter, plays multiple instruments. And that piece, to complicate things even more, because we're going to be talking about National Sexual Assault Awareness Month, but that is also tied into issues of race and slavery and, property. So it wasn't bad enough of what the woman had to go through. Then there's the constant fear of losing a child as a result of what they were living through at that time. If I look a little bizarre, it's because I'm coming to you through my phone here in my office. I did everything I could to be on the campus today, but in time for this show. But my technology is not there for me. And today my guests are Emily Duran, who is the preventionist and community educator and program coordinator from Mount Sinai Sexual Assault and Violence Intervention Program, or SAVI, and Nathan Tosh, who is the program coordinator of LaGuardia's Women's Center and the LGBTQIA Safe Zone Hub. And we're going to be talking about National Sexual Assault Awareness Month here in April. Interestingly, comes on the heels of Women's Heritage Month, right? I don't know, is it history or heritage?
I think it's history.
Yeah, because I know that they changed African American History Month to Heritage Month, and so I don't know if they've changed everything that way. Welcome. If that's a good lead in. Sorry for again the technical issues, but I told our guest that we usually. Emily's been on the show before, so she's talked a little bit about her background. But Nathan, which I for some reason I thought had been on my show before, is a newcomer. And so I wanted to give him an opportunity to talk a little bit about his background, his education, and coming to LaGuardia. So Nathan, would you like to do that?
Yeah, thank you so much. I have been involved with the radio, just not particularly this show, but for everybody listening, hi, my name is Nathan Tosh. As mentioned, I'm the program coordinator here at the Women's Center and the LGBTQIA Safe Zone Hub at LaGuardia Community College. My background for education is in English. I have both a bachelor's and a master's in English. I started my higher ed journey at the University of North Florida, which I'm originally from Florida. I grew up there for the first 21 years of my life. And I got really involved because there was a very active LGBT community there. So I got involved with their LGBTQIA resource center on campus, and eventually moved over to their housing department, which I felt a need to develop a gender inclusive housing program for the college to allow trans students to come together, live that they identified with, just because there was a lot of, red flags, red tape that prevented students from living with people that they felt comfortable with. So I was working with housing and residence life for a total of 3 years there. And then when I went on to grad school, I went to the University of Rochester and continued my focus in English, but also worked as a graduate assistant at their Intercultural Center and Language Center, focused a lot in LGBT focused events. So a pretty similar role to the one that I had here I have here at LaGuardia. Before I moved to LaGuardia, there was a few years where I was doing some legal practice as well as editing work. But especially during the beginning of the pandemic, I started reflecting a lot of what I wanted to do throughout life. And I really missed my higher ed experience. I really find value in connecting with students and giving them the opportunities to do some really amazing work. So that felt very important. So when I saw the position open at LaGuardia, it felt very natural to apply to it. And since coming here, we've done a lot of really incredible work. As we're going to be talking about, we're partnering with SAVI on this great series of events called Building Safer Relationships and Community that we've been doing for, I want to say, 2 or 3 years now, partnering with different organizations throughout the city to connect students with different resources. But we also have a number of other programs that are really important to the students. We have support circles to allow students to come together and connect with each other. We have a leadership program for LGBTQ students to gain career advice, insight, make connections with other students. We have a number of events that went through Women's History Month. We just did a pretty great bell hook celebration, which should be available on the institutional archives coming pretty soon. And we have a bunch planned for Pride Month coming up later in June. But that's a pretty succinct introduction. So thank you for having me.
It's interesting because I didn't realize that you came on board with the pandemic. I assumed you'd been here before for whatever reasons. Emily, I did a quick introduction, but and you have been on before. But why don't you explain SAVI one more time for folks who may not have watched our show last year?
Yeah, absolutely. And Nathan, I'll just say I also have an English education background, so we have more in common than I realized. So anyway, my name is Emily. Like Hugo said, I'm one of the program coordinators with the Mount Sinai SAVI program, or the Sexual Assault and Violence Intervention program. And so I like to think of our services as having 3 tiers. So we're a nonprofit based in New York City. We primarily serve Manhattan and Queens, but we're expanding into the other boroughs slowly but surely. And so, like I said, I think of our services as having 3 tiers. So the first one is our counseling services. So it's all completely free and confidential. And the sessions are given by our amazing clinicians. And it usually lasts about 12 sessions, but of course we work with the individual to figure out a plan that works for them. And so if folks finish up counseling at LaGuardia or they want an off-campus resource, we might be a good option for them. Experience sexual assault or gender violence in the emergency room. And we're actually having a training for folks who are 21 years old and older, and they might be looking to get a little bit more involved in their community. They can reach out to me or reach out to SAVI. We have our website. We also have an Instagram page at Mount Sinai SAVI, and we're pretty responsive to all of those. So that's our second tier. And then our third tier is the team that I'm a part of, the Education and Training Department. And so we get to go on to college campuses in New York City, and my supervisor gets to go into middle and high schools and talk about all things related to preventing sexual violence. And so we're really grateful to be brought back on today, part of the show, to talk a little bit about Sexual Assault Awareness Month. We have a ton of events we're gearing up for, but Hugo, I don't know if you wanted to get to that at another point, so I'll stop there.
Well, I mean, actually, yeah, we are going to gear it up, but I'm just going to stop to say a couple of things, which is if folks are noticing that the lights are going on and off in my office, if they are, that's another beautiful thing about being on campus with my automatic light switches. I usually turn on my fan so there's movement in front of the electric eye, but I failed to do that before the show began. So that's just one thing. Yeah, I guess, we can just get right into it. And by the way, I was going to say SAVI's role on campus. Are you providing all 3 of those services here at the campus, or is there a specific role that SAVI plays at LaGuardia?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we do provide, we partner with folks like Nathan to provide those educational services on campus. And then we serve as an off-campus resource for students if they do need the counseling services, for example. If students get assistance in the emergency room, it depends on which emergency room they go to, for example, if they've experienced something. So we are serving them in different capacities. But and I know that in the past we've talked about doing things like office hours with students to help them, a little bit more individually seek out the resources they need. So we kind of operate in different ways.
Okay. Well, yeah, so let's go ahead and get into it. By the way, I wanted to point out that I'm actually writing right now. I'm asking for a letter of support from the Student Government Association, and I realized that when I wrote out the title of Nathan's space, the LGBTQIA and I don't know why the plus is missing. I thought there was a plus in there somewhere. I left that Safe Zone hub. Just call it the LGBTQIA plus hub, and I think it's important. The Safe Zone hub. You want to explain the difference between that, because I don't think some folks know the role of that space as a safe zone.
Yeah, so as a safe zone hub, safety generally just means that you're allowed to have a space to just come together and express yourself freely without fearment of being judged or feeling ridiculed or anything like that, which I think oftentimes LGBTQIA students may feel just outside. These are spaces where you really get to come in with like no judgment. Obviously, we always hold our space as a point of education rather than a point of judgment. So if you come into our LGBTQ space and you just don't know something, like we have the space to sort of educate people. We have the space to really talk about a lot of these, maybe more difficult conversations, maybe something where maybe you feel like, oh, this is an offensive question. Am I even allowed to ask this? So that's what the Safe Zone Hub really emphasizes, is just coming together to allow students to like really be able to express themselves and be who they are. It's also a space where they don't have to worry about necessarily people from the outside going out. So a lot of the things that you come into both the Women's Center and the Safe Zone Hub, you're allowed to disclose things. You're allowed to talk about topics, and there's no fear that like these topics are going to leave the room. You're in there to really be together with people who you share an identity with. You already have something in common, and you just get to be yourself. I don't think that many students always get the ability to feel.
It's interesting because I'm teaching a first year seminar, and I'm teaching somebody else's syllabus because it was kind of a last minute thrown. And I've taught that course before, but I've never taught a 1 hour section of it. And the first exercise on Blackboard discussion board, this electronic journal, was disclosure. And one of the things we'd asked is personal pronouns. And so we'd gotten them. And then I found myself, I can't remember which class it was, the second or third, where I had a student who was, kindly, showing us her, I think it was degree works or something. And I kept referring to her as a pronoun. And finally she had to send me a post. She had her phone and she says, coughed and showed me and said they. And she wanted me to, they wanted me to say they. This is, I got to tell you, for me, being 60-year-old man and just learning this is, it takes some doing. It's a very conscious act, and what's bizarre is that I can't remember where I was. I was on a Zoom meeting with folks from Florida, as you mentioned Florida, right? And you would have, they just couldn't wrap their head around it. They didn't understand the entire concept of the pronouns, and it was almost offensive in their response to it. They were kind of like laughing about it. But this is my charge lately, trying to build that muscle. As long as you, especially since I asked that person, I asked them. I have to use it. Is this a kind of a question that people come into your zone? I mean, the non LGBTQIA plus folks who come in and ask for help. What's with the pronouns?
Yeah, I was going to say we have both students and faculty staff who ask questions about pronouns. One, especially here in New York City, it's actually a legal requirement to really respect. I believe our protected pronouns are he, him, she, her, and they, them. So there are other neo pronouns like ze, them, ze, zir. There's about 20 of them, one for basically every letter of the alphabet. I don't believe those ones are legally protected, but in New York City, we have to legally respect if somebody says, I want to use this pronoun. This is more like intentionally misgendering somebody. So like if you accidentally make the mistake, it's not like, oh, now you're in legal trouble. It's more like if you're going, I don't see you as a they, them, I see you as she, her, then that's when we get into an issue. But what I've always offered a lot of my educational friends, because I have teachers who are going through, friends that are teachers that are going through the same thing. And I'll tell them, write like a paragraph with like the student's name and then like 5 sentences of something that they're doing. So like, I'll be like, Nathan's going to the store. He is buying chocolate. He likes chocolate. Like very simple 5 sentences. and then rewrite that paragraph 5 times with the corrected pronouns, and you'll have it like that. You'll just really sort of get them down. But I've noticed a lot, especially for like a lot of our Hispanic students, they're often English is not their first language, and there is no gender neutral pronoun in Spanish. Most things are masculinized or feminized, so like that just takes the extra work. And oftentimes when like they are very interested, it's just like understanding. I also think there's sometimes an understanding misunderstanding or mispronouncing identity, because I'll have somebody come to me and they'll talk to me. Oh, I know, and they'll act as their identity when like maybe they just like that pronoun. You don't have to identify with pronouns to have an identity. You can just pick a pronoun that feels right. If I really wanted to, I could start using like she, her to describe myself. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm connected to womanhood or anything like that. It's just maybe what I feel comfortable with. And I think sometimes the learning process takes like a little bit more time, but with like people who are that enthusiastic about learning it, they seem to get it very quickly.
You sound like what a Jesuit priest who the rote learning school. But,
Nathan,
it works, right?
Yeah, Nathan, I didn't know that it was legally protected in New York State, so I'm going to start using that in some of my presentations, because we talk a lot about the intersection of how interpersonal violence happens, and kind of maybe like these smaller acts of, like you had mentioned, the kind of more intentional, I know what your pronouns are and I am not going to make any effort because I don't see you this way. So I really appreciate that. I think that could be really helpful.
So let's do it. Let's talk about National Sexual Assault Awareness Month. How old is this?
So it was established officially in 2001, but that kind of came on the heels of, the civil rights movement, the women's rights movements, the establishment of the Violence Against Women Act in 1990s area. And so, yeah. And then in 2000 was when the National Sexual Violence Resource Center was established. And so they, in the past, they've been doing in April a Sexual Assault Awareness Week. But they really came together. This all kind of converged around 2001, and they established the Sexual Violence Awareness Month in April. And so one of the colors used to signify that is teal. This is like the closest thing to teal that I have in my closet. So I try. But teal is used to represent, supporting folks who've experienced sexual assault. So that was kind of around the time that it happened. But Nathan, I don't know if you wanted to add any facts to that.
I was going to say, I don't necessarily have any facts, but I do believe it's really important to bring this onto college campuses. Just according to RAIN, which is an organization that helps victims of sexual violence, domestic or interpersonal violence. According to them, 26.4% of female undergraduate students experience some form of sexual assault during their time in college, as well as about 5.8% of men experience some sort of things. And these conversations, especially when we don't have the ability to talk about them, nobody knows where to go. They often just sort of lie in silence. I find often with even our students doing previous programming, they just don't have any connection to outside resources of like, this has happened to me, where do I go? And it really is important to have these open conversations to allow students to connect, express themselves, and find resources that are really going to benefit them and be able to get what they need to get through.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, Nathan, that those rates are so much higher for the LGBTQIA plus community, especially bi folks and transgender folks tend to experience the highest numbers in that community. So I really love when we are able to kind of collaborate to, like you said, try to figure out what resources folks might need access to.
So how do we begin? How do we begin this conversation at the college campus and with the work this month?
I mean, I can talk a little bit about the program that Emily and I are working together on. Every semester, we've at the Women's Center and the LGBTQIA Safe Zone Hub for the past couple of years, we've been doing this 4 to 5 part series called Building Safer Relationships and Community, which is always partnered with an outside resource to connect students and talk about some of these difficult conversations. In the past, we partnered with Safe Horizon, which has 24/7 support throughout all the boroughs. But this year we're partnering, or this semester we're partnering with SAVI, and we're doing 4 different talks. So our 4 different conversations. The first one is going to be called Empower You, Sexual Violence 101, which will go over a basic overview of like sexual violence resources and options for students. And then from there, we'll get like a little bit more in depth, where we'll have an art of asking, which will be a virtual workshop about consent, a conversation about bystander intervention, as well as a topic about ghosting and what rejection means, which I feel is really important right now. All these topics, is specifically going through the material that Emily has developed. They feel, while they are still quite heavy, we're still talking about sexual violence, sexual assault. They feel a lot more approachable than what we've seen in the past couple years doing this program. It feels like something that students can actually like have conversations about without maybe feeling like they have to disclose too much or be triggered by something. Additionally, in those spaces, we always have a representative from the Wellness Center to sit by, and if students need to like step out or talk to somebody immediately right there, we'll have somebody from the Wellness Center available to chat with them, de-escalate any situations, which feels pretty important.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. And one thing I'll add is that, we talked about these statistics, right? And I don't like to use those to, scare anyone, but it's just to let folks know that, they're not alone. And especially with this first presentation on our list, the Sexual Violence 101, we do focus a lot in the second half on how do we support a friend, because we know this isn't necessarily like an exceptional thing that's happening. And so if folks are wondering how to support a friend, that could be a really good, workshop to go to. And yeah, I think Nathan made a great point. I hope that we'll make these approachable. We always say, at least for my presentations, I'm always saying, you don't have to keep your camera on. If you need to step out, check your phone, whatever you need to do. And hopefully we can get folks to come back and engage in the space. And if not, we want them to do whatever feels safest. Yeah.
So I was going to say, so most of this is still happening virtually. We're still doing this through Zoom and
right now, yeah.
mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And do you get experience that you're talking to a lot of black boxes when you're doing this work?
So it's interesting you asked that. I would say sometimes yes, and then sometimes we'll have like a 4-part series like this, and we'll get some folks who are really consistent. And then like by the end, they're turning their cameras on, they're asking all these questions. They're like, when are we going to do more? So, I don't really judge either way, because I try to incorporate a couple of different ways for them to engage, whether it's with their cameras on or off. They can type in the chat, they can type anonymously. I'll try to incorporate, activities they can do on their own time outside of this workshop, because I know there's so much Zoom burnout. I mean, I get it. We've all been on Zoom for so long. And so, of course, we're always, reassessing to see when it's safe to go back in person. But right now, we felt like this was the best option.
It's 1:29. I'm just going to use it as an opportunity to do a quick station ID. The show is What's Going On. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez. And here on LaGuardia Web Radio, WLGR, and my guests today are Emily Durand, preventionist and community educator / program coordinator for Mount Sinai Sexual Assault and Violence Intervention Program, or SAVI, and Nathan Tosh, program coordinator of LaGuardia's Women's Center and the LGBTQIA Safe Zone Hub. And we are talking about National Sexual Assault Awareness Month. What do you think the toughest the toughest problem we face as folks here at the college, staff, faculty, with this particular issue? What's the toughest issue we have to face in talking about this work?
I mean, speaking to this work, I think oftentimes hearing a lot of this information is it's a lot to take on. So I think for students who may be experiencing it, a lot of students that we've had have said that like they don't want to like trauma dump this onto somebody else. They don't want to share this information. And then I think for other faculty and staff members, one, it's taking on all this responsibility, but also maybe not even knowing where to refer students to. We have students who are maybe like experiencing this and expressing this to a professor, and the professor does not have maybe the connections, and they're just like, well, I can send you to the Women's Center, and then maybe they're sending them to 3 different centers, and maybe at the end of it, the student is exhausted. I think if they're feeling like they're starting to get that runaround of just like, oh, you have to go to the Women's Center, or you have to go to the Wellness Center, and then they're sending you somewhere else, and then they're sending you somewhere else, they're going to feel like, okay, this was hopeless at this point. So I think a lot of it is actually the connection and feeling comfortable to really express it from my experience.
Emily?
Yeah, I would agree that that is definitely a huge concern. And there's so many laws that are in place that in theory are supposed to support folks and get them the resources they need. But sometimes that can be lacking, the training to support, faculty and staff. Some of the first year, information sessions that are given. And so I would say that can be a huge concern, especially for folks who've already experienced sexual violence. And then, of course, sometimes preventing it can, I'm the preventionist, so I'm gonna have to talk about it sometime. Sometimes that can be pretty tough because there's a lot of competing influences. People, and sometimes folks want to focus on just one kind of aspect of how to support folks. And so I really try to work to kind of get folks to think about all sides of things, how we can already experience violence, how we can prevent folks from perpetrating violence again, but then how can we prevent it from happening in the first place? So yeah.
Well, what is the number one way we can prevent this from happening? Or should I say the top ways?
Well, that's a huge question, Hugo. The answer is ending.
Just about that. No.
The answer is ending all kinds of oppression, right? It's not just sexual violence. It's all about, how do we end racial violence? How do we end violence against trans folks? At every intersection. I was in a webinar once where I was listening to some folks who this nonprofit's mission was to end sexual violence in one generation. And they were in this like HR presentation. And so the facilitator of this asked this person like, okay, that's a great mission to have, but are you also going to end racism in one generation? Are you going to end, misogyny, like all of these things? And so that's something I think about a lot. But that being said, I think thinking about that, all these intersecting oppressions, we want to tackle things at all from all approaches, right? So we have, we can talk about the individual, but we also want to talk about, what I call the socio-ecological model. And you want to look at how do we approach people from different relationships in their communities, and then how do we approach systems? And so it's really multi-pronged. But for me, in my little role, I kind of think of those 3 tiers of prevention that I kind of just talked about. So talking about how do we provide like sexuality education, right? How do we teach folks basic communication strategies like we'll talk about in this series with rejection, for example. So that's kind of my little corner of the world. But then we also have supporting folks, because we know that once folks a risk factor for experiencing violence is having experienced violence in the past, which is definitely not, the fault of the person who's experienced that violence, right? But we want to make sure they get those resources, right? So they don't have to experience it again. So definitely different approaches that we can take. Nathan, I don't know if you wanted to add on to that with your specialty.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just as you were talking, it just reminded me of, as I was thinking, it just, you were talking about even the conversational pieces, which I think are really important because, one of the workshops that I'm actually the most excited for is the "What's So Scary About Ghosting," to talk about rejection, and how to deal with it, because I'm both trans and gay, and like a lot of the spaces where like I can meet people, it's being in like these sort of like hookup culture related environments. Like you are sort of forced to relegate to like other gay men through like a dating app like Grindr, and people on that will literally just like disappear. You also don't necessarily know anybody's like true intentions on these apps. Like there are people who are very aggressive, and like you're constantly being like pelted with a bunch of different information. When somebody just starts rejecting you, you have to like start dealing with your own body image again, which is, just like a very hard thing to really tackle on. So like really having these conversations about just like coping and like the common courtesy, I think is just one of the small ways that we can start really demystifying a lot of the issues around sexual assault.
How does our multicultural college, our diversity, which is our strength, right? We always tout diversity as a strength. How does that play a role in trying to roll out this kind of support and services in the LaGuardia community? Is that an issue?
I was going to say, I mean, for many of our students, they are already coming with multiple intersectional identities. I don't necessarily, I think for us, like we're a predominantly Hispanic serving institution. And even within our LGBTQ space, like it's very apparent that we're predominantly um, assisting Hispanic students. It's just another part of their identity. So I think especially when we're talking about like diversity and intersectionality, our students are really living it. If LGBT spaces, they're also going to need support based off of their racial or cultural identities. And we're just really leaning into the needs of the students. We haven't necessarily found that students maybe like have, one identity that maybe disconnects from different identities. Our students are very perceptive, are very engaged with themselves, which is something really amazing about LaGuardia. I think a lot of students who like fully know who they are, and they're really just like getting all the support that they need, which is great. It's not always the case. I've been in many LGBT centers where people are really trying to figure it out, especially at these earlier stages of college. So these students are really coming in knowing what they need. So that's really helpful. But I think there are probably conversations where like different groups, maybe like if you are, LGBTQ, maybe it's something you don't talk about at home. Maybe it's something that you don't talk about in your community. Those are conversations, but especially for our spaces, seeing as it's designated as like a women's center and LGBTQIA safe zone hub, students are often coming into the space. This is who I am. I'm being a part of this. So there is less of that. Sometimes maybe it's hard to bring those people initially in the door, but if they are seeking the support, they're going to find it, knowing that it is more or less confidential.
So you're handling people who come to the space. You're not necessarily moving out into the community, and because I'm guessing, like for example, perpetrators are not going to be coming to the space, right? They might have to be found in the community. That other role, you were referring to people who had experienced the sexual violence before, but there's also, part of it is some people, it's like a family disease or something, or maybe have experienced it themselves as victims and now they're perpetrators, or this is the only way that they were socialized. How do we address that community, the folks that are on the other side of this, or is there do we not really have a chance with those folks?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, I want to, offer a statistic that only about 2% of the population are folks perpetrating violence. So it's really small, but they're perpetrating the vast majority of these, right? They tend to be repeat folks who repeat, that action. So we don't need to be incredibly afraid that it's incredibly common, but it is definitely an interesting population to reach out to. Right now, we're not doing a program like this, but they have programs where they're usually a cognitive behavioral intervention program where folks, we find that folks, rather than, talking about sexual violence from this, academic or like, here's why this is wrong kind of manner, it tends to be a lot more about how do I learn skills? How do I realize that my thoughts and feelings are related to my behaviors? And then how do I choose different behaviors despite, what I'm thinking and feeling? And so there are programs like that. They're pretty tough to implement. I started one in my last job in Ohio. And to be effective, they really need to be about a year long, right? People come in twice a week for a year. So it's really challenging, but it is possible. They are effective, or they can be effective if they're done right. And I always think that, we find that a lot of folks who perpetrate violence tend to be in the college age. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're attending college, but they are in that traditional, 18 to 25 year old range. So we do have a unique opportunity for folks like me in this field to be doing this kind of outreach. Now, one other clever way that I'm working with some other campuses right now to kind of do that outreach indirectly is by starting a class for credit on campuses. Usually these would be like one of those kind of like large seminar like classes where we have, 100 folks. So there's different approaches we can take, but it is definitely still an area that I find needs a lot more funding, needs a lot more kind of building out in and collaboration with folks who've already been doing transformative justice initiatives like that for a long time.
We're actually running. We're not quite 15 minutes away, but we're moving into that portion of it. And I just want to, we have someone's watching if they want to ask us a question. But I wanted, we usually talk about the future in this last quarter hour. But I wanted to say, of the activities that you're engaged with this year and providing, I wanted to give you each a chance to talk about the one that's you're the most excited about, whether it's something that you're going to try that's new or something that has a good impact on the community. You want to go, Nathan, since Emily spoke last?
Sure. Well, first, I also wanted to respond a little bit to your last question, Hugo, about just like perpetrators. I just wanted to also say for the Women's Center and the Safe Zone Hub, for students who are interested in getting involved in our center, we're not obviously doing a questionnaire to figure out if somebody is a perpetrator, but something that I think makes our space feel a lot safer is that we are a fully staffed center. There's always somebody there, but during the times that our center is open. If students are there, somebody's making you feel uncomfortable, somebody is saying something that feels inappropriate, you have the staff members there that are there 9 to 5 who are able to de-escalate these situations, make sure that a student is able to leave a situation without any sort of issue. I think that is really important to note about our space specifically, because not every LGBT center is fully staffed. there are often LGBT centers, even throughout CUNY, that are spaces where students may have like a student worker or a volunteer just sort of sitting there. Maybe they open the door and students can just hang out there. Whereas we fully have people who are available to support students. But in terms of things that I'm really excited about this semester, again, I can't talk more about this Building Safer Relationships community series just because it is so exciting to just have like a new partner with it, and it's such a refresh because we've been doing it for the entire time that I've been here with Safe Horizon, and it's been important information, but I always come away from those meetings a little drained. Like, it's a lot of here's information on how to protect yourself, and very little conversation about like how are we feeling, how are we doing, what are the check-ins, how do we approach this in a more easy way. And I've been noticing that like we've been having more of the fallout from students who will attend the first one and then they go, this was too much. So having something that's a lot more approachable, I think, is super, super exciting. And then just continuing with many of our LGBTQIA focused programming. I think it's no secret that I'm passionate about that community specifically. And I'm really excited we have a leadership program that's happening this semester. So I'm just very excited for those students to really get a new experience and really develop some leadership skills and get more involved in campus at LaGuardia, or if they're transferring over to other institutions throughout CUNY to continue some of the great work that's happening here at LaGuardia.
Yeah, and I agree, Nathan. I'm really grateful that you brought us in this semester. I'm really excited for this series. I had mentioned earlier that, I have that education background, and we know that it takes repetition for folks to really kind of take something away from workshops like these. So I'm really excited that it's a series. And I'll just mention that I got to do this a similar series on other campuses this semester. So it's really exciting to kind of have that that repetition and be talking about these topics. Like you said, Nathan, I really think it's important to, we talk about, I think sometimes like when it comes to college students, we think that we have to do everything in a very like academic way, or like maybe they already know everything that they need to know about relationships. And really, I try to focus on building out kind of the basic skills. I know when I got to college, I had never thought about what my values were. Like, what are my values? And I had an opportunity to do that finally my senior year. And so it's things like thinking about values, thinking about how do I ask someone for consent? How do I gain confidence with that? How do I cope with rejection? How do I support a friend who has experienced this? So I'm really looking forward to starting this series this week. I think it will be Thursdays from 1 to 2. Is that right, Nathan?
Yep, that's correct.
So if you're thinking some more about the future, I mean, I'm guessing you're pretty much caught up with the programming for this series, but are there things you're already thinking about doing next year, like things you couldn't, you would have liked to have done this time, but you run out of time, right?
I was going to say, going forward, I think something that's going to be really impactful is just the change of modalities. As we know, we're not fully in person yet, which is felt like the most important reason to keep this conversation online this semester. So I'm thinking having like physical space to talk to students, having students being able to like walk out of the room with like a brochure or like the connection already there. They don't have to scribble something down during like a Zoom call. I think that's going to be an important step forward. I think it also just makes these spaces more engaging because as you talked about earlier, Hugo, we have the black box syndrome where students may sit in a Zoom meeting and maybe they're like collecting a co-curricular activity and like maybe they're not really engaged, but I think it's in person, it's very hard to not be engaged with these conversations.
I'd be surprised. Speaking as a teacher, but excuse me, Emily, anything you're thinking about already for next year?
definitely have a few ideas. I agree with Nathan, looking into hopefully things will be a little bit safer by the fall. We'll have to, of course, play it by ear. I think, what comes next, I'll definitely be discussing with Nathan and folks like Stacy from the Wellness Center. I would love to do something that we had been in talks about in the past, like giving office hours for students on campus. Because I find that sometimes folks will, feel a little bit more empowered to talk about whatever their situation is when they're not, in front of a whole group, right? And those would just be something like, asking educational questions or asking about a resource or what happens when I go to Title IX, things like that. So that's something I might be in chats about, but I don't want to jump ahead too quickly. So yeah.
My experience, because faculty, we keep office hours, and I always joke with my students, it's the most underutilized time. I mean, I obviously keep busy. I have things to do, but they don't necessarily, especially when it was physical, they don't necessarily come here physically unless it's in proximity of the time of class. Sometimes they come if it's just before or right after. Most students approach you jokingly, like you said, at the end of class when everybody's left, and they ask you this great question, and you say, "Why didn't you say that? Why did you ask that question before you left?" Because everybody needs to hear this answer. But
yeah, and I always try to stay at least 15 minutes after a presentation. I try to never do things, back to back, so that, because I always get someone, right, who's like, "Oh, I have this question," or "What's your email again?" or things like that. So yeah, but I always try to also think about, this mantra that has been instilled in me since, my freshman year of college, since getting involved in this work, which is, if you've impacted one person, you've done your job. So I always say, if one person shows up to office hours through the whole semester, they still got, that resource or got their need met, hopefully, right? So, because I think this work can be small and very slow going, and can sometimes be discouraging, but I feel like that phrase has really helped me remember what our goals are. So yeah.
Well, thanks for that. I'll think about that when I'm here, waiting for somebody to show up. But one thing I was going to say is we've got about a few minutes left. So any folks you want to thank? Any last words you want to get in if we didn't get a chance to talk about something?
I was going to say, one, I just want to thank both Stacey Chen and Dima Bay Rockdar, who Stacey was originally supposed to be on this episode, but they have both been doing a tremendous amount of work to really help organize this program and keep it consistent on campus throughout the pandemic, throughout the past few years. So really thanking them. I also just want to give a quick shout out to some of our students who are doing some really incredible work. There's been a number of us faculty and staff who've been working on a separate podcast hosted by the radio called Reclaiming Power, which was first organized throughout the pandemic after the deaths or the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, to really have these conversations, give students a platform to discuss and speak on societal issues. And there is a new episode coming out tomorrow, April 5th, starring LaGuardia student Starla Repka, who will be speaking on Thursday. On Thursday. Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday. And she'll be speaking with about LGBTQ identity in conversations with one of her friends. So just promoting that student and their endeavors feels really important.
Emily, anybody you want to thank or any last words?
Sure. First of all, Nathan, I love that. I'll have to try to find a way to listen in on that. For me, of course, just like Nathan said, thanking Rima, Stacy, Nathan, everyone who helped get me here today, and of course you, Hugo. And I did just want to plug one more thing again. Our Instagram page is Mount Sinai SAVI. If folks are interested in, bringing a workshop or presentation, you can reach out to us there or on the Mount Sinai website. But tomorrow is going to be Teal Tuesday. And so I encourage folks to wear teal to show support for folks who've experienced sexual assault. I have a little pin here. If you don't have a full teal, maybe you have a pin or some earrings, and you can take a picture of that and share it to social media with the hashtag Sexual Assault Awareness Month or SAAM. You can feel free to tag SAVI in that. You can feel free to tag anyone from LaGuardia. There's so many Instagram handles that I can share, but feel free to tag all of us and participate, because it makes a huge, I know it seems small when it's just, a picture on social media, but I think it's so important to show up and show that kind of support to folks and let them know, you're a safe person to come to. So I think that's all I have.
All right. So today we've been speaking to Emily Duran, preventionist and community educator / program coordinator for Mount Sinai Sexual Assault and Violence Intervention Program, or SAVI, and Nathan Tosh, who is the program coordinator of LaGuardia's Women's Center and the LGBTQIA Safe Zone Hub. We've been talking about National Sexual Assault Awareness Month. I want to thank you both for being on the show. I consider this a platform. I would hate that we'd only see you once a year or once every other year. I mean, Nathan, if you want to come back, obviously in June, right, for Pride Month, you are welcome. You're always welcome, both of you. And the show has been What's Going On. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, here on LaGuardia Web Radio, WLGR. We're going to go out the way we came in with, this time, Jillian Welch with another approach to sexual assault. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.